Would it have been embarrassing to display a painting like that on the front porch? My daughter-in-law, Macy, who had sold my prize painting on a flea market app without my permission, stated flatly. My mother had done a colored pencil drawing of Gerberus for me from her hospital bed before she died. That drawing was a memento of my late mother. I know, but I can't hang an amateur drawing because it's too shabby, Macy insisted. Do you think you should talk to me like that, even though you were my daughter-in-law? I said boldly, but Macy was unfazed. She drew her arms across her chest and stared at me. Please consider your position. We will be taking care of you in the future, right? It's that deciding line again. So, you're allowed to sell my belongings without my permission. I'm your one and only son's wife. Think about how much we are going to take care of you, Macy retorted. She gave me one more look before walking out the door, her luxury brand shoes clacking. I'd be moving into a new house alone the next day. Macy knew this and sold the painting to harass me. Henry, my son, and Macy, my daughter-in-law, had sold my belongings without my permission before. I was furious but resigned to the fact that I would never get them back. But I'll never forgive her for selling my mother's mementos. Both Macy and Henry, who was always at her disposal, irritated me. I decided to completely cut ties with my son and his wife when I moved into my new house tomorrow. My husband's son and wife can live in this old house. I am Amy, a 50-year-old housewife. For years, I did all of the housework while working part-time at a factory. I looked after my family, which includes my husband, my only son, and as of 3 years ago, my daughter-in-law, Macy. My mother, who raised me as a single mother, died 6 months ago. She left me a large sum of money from her life insurance policy. I took advantage of the opportunity to purchase a small new house and decided to divorce my husband, with whom I had a strained relationship. The day before I moved in, Macy sold my mother's painting without my permission. When I told my husband we were splitting up, he simply said, "Do whatever you want." During our many years as a couple, our relationship had cooled. I believe neither of us did anything wrong and that what happened was unavoidable. My son and his wife, who lived with us, were the ones who were against my leaving. Who will do the housework if you leave? Aren't you a housewife? My son asked. I am a civil servant like Henry, so I am not like you, who only works part-time, I retorted. It's appalling to hear a mother throw her family out of the house, my son's wife chimed in. They both continued to complain as I was packing. First and foremost, why are you buying a house now? My son questioned. It's the money my mother left me, and it's up to me what I do with it, I replied firmly. When the insurance money arrives, you should put it to good use for your family. A house where you'll live alone is squandering money, my son's wife added. She's right, you should have shared grandmother's insurance money with us, my son insisted. Henry's wife was a brand-obsessed woman who never washed a single pair of underwear and was constantly taking dance, yoga, English conversation, and other classes. My son, who was at her beck and call, blamed me all at the same time. This was enough for me. My friend Jane, who lives near my new house, invited me over the night I moved in to join her for dinner. Thank you very much. I still haven't unpacked anything, I said gratefully. Jane's house is magnificent. She and her husband both love dogs, so they built a house to accommodate a large dog. In fact, 3 Dobermans are currently resting quietly in the living room's corner. While eating the hamburger Jane had prepared for me, I opened up to her about Henry and Macy. What's the deal with your daughter-in-law? And I'm sorry, but your son is also pitiful, Jane remarked. Henry used to be a stronger person, but now he's at the mercy of his wife. I'm tired of it, I sighed, feeling a sense of frustration. One of the large dogs approached me and nuzzled my feet, as if to console me. It was Hannah, the female of the 3 Dobermans. Hannah is much gentler than my son. All of our dogs are smart and good, I said, petting her gently. Jane, being so good with dogs, used to be a trainer. Her 3 new dogs, although large and scary in appearance, were really gentle and extremely intelligent. They would never attack anyone, but they would bark at uninvited guests if Jane instructed them to. I wish I had a dog as gentle as Hannah is, I remarked. Why don't you get yourself one? I'll train it for you. Indeed, you're free to do whatever you want as of today in your new house. You begin a new life, isn't that right? Jane suggested. I thought so too. Macy and I are moving to my parents' house next month, I shared. At the end of the month, my son called me with surprising news. I had just gotten used to living alone and was starting to enjoy my independence. I reflected. Your parents' house. Oh, you're moving to Macy's parents' house, my son said. No, it's my mother's house, my home. You already live at your father's house, I clarified. I wasn't sure what he was saying, but I knew one thing for certain. I was ready for this new chapter in my life. I spoke with Macy after realizing that my parents' house belonged solely to my mother, not my father. We decided to move to her house. No, my house isn't big enough for the three of us, Macy objected. I was adamant about not putting up with Henry and Macy bossing me around and making me do all of the housework. But one of the rooms does have a place to sleep. You can sleep in the living room corner, and we can use that space as our bedroom, Macy suggested. Don't be ridiculous. What are you talking about? You want me to sleep in the living room corner? I could feel my face getting hot with rage. We're coming even if you don't like it. I'll start by shipping you a couple of boxes, Henry interjected. I'm not going to accept them, I retorted. Well then, I'll think of something. Anyway, I'm coming, so please look after me, Henry said abruptly, then hung up the phone. I don't want this. I despise the idea of Henry and Macy bossing me around and forcing me to do all the housework. That is something I will not allow to happen, I declared to Jane the next day as we went to a family restaurant. I wanted her to listen to my story. I'm sorry, but you have the worst son and daughter-in-law, Jane remarked as she sipped her latte. You must not accept it under any circumstances. You must politely say no, she continued. Well, since it is those two, they might hire a moving company. I don't know what to do, I replied, feeling overwhelmed. To wash down my pitiful feelings, I took a sip of jasmine tea. I enjoy this tea, but it is quite bitter, I remarked. It is difficult to say no when the movers will come. If we're not careful, we might get into trouble, Jane observed. We have to do something to make them not want to come to my house. I can't stand the way they're acting, I insisted. Well, we could ask my children for help, Jane suggested. What, Hannah and the dogs? I asked, referring to Jane's 3 kids, her 3 beloved Dobermans. My dogs will bark, growl, and act out to some extent on command. I could ask them to scare them away or something. In fact, my son has been afraid of dogs since he was a child, Jane explained. It's difficult to live with a son and his wife who would sell their mother's mementos without permission. So let's come up with something, I agreed. Thank you very much, Jane, I added, feeling a little relieved as a result of our conversation. When I returned home, I discovered that my son and his wife were serious. 2 large cardboard boxes had been stacked in front of the front door. These are Henry's and my possessions. We thought you would refuse the courier, so I brought them. We will move in next month, so please keep them in the house. Macy, I read the note attached to the cardboard box, feeling my shoulders slump in disappointment. With no other option, I brought the box inside, and upon opening it, I discovered numerous personal belongings belonging to Henry and Macy. There were Henry's imported watches and leather jackets, alongside Macy's designer bags, clothes, and shoes. They must have left behind valuable items, which I wouldn't discard without permission. It felt like a dirty move. How little they must think of me to sell off my mother's paintings or leave this luggage without my permission. Jane's voice from the family restaurant came to mind. Well, we could ask my children for help, she had suggested. Since settling in after the move, I occasionally accompanied Jane on dog walks. She often invites me for a change of scenery, being a great friend to have. It means a lot to me. Why don't you sell their belongings? Macy would sell them on her own, wouldn't she? Jane proposed. Yes, even the memento my mother painted, I'd replied as Moon, a male dog, looked at me from the end of the leash I was holding. By the way, why do your son and his wife want to live with you? They're both government employees and have money, so why don't they just live together? Jane inquired. They don't like doing housework, especially Macy, because she's always learning, going out to play, or watching fashion and makeup videos. So, you've been doing all the housework by yourself, I confirmed. Yes, my husband never did it, and Henry works overtime and travels a lot, and Macy is the same way, I explained, recalling the conversation between my son and his wife on the day. I made the announcement of my departure from our home met with immediate concern about who would handle the housework. If you leave the house, who will do the housework? Henry asked. Well, you can, I replied. No, obviously not. I want your mother to do it. Jane sighed in disgust upon hearing this. It wasn't until a week later that I received several phone calls from Macy, who had been persistently trying to reach me. Your house is quite small, right? Macy finally asked after dozens of calls. Yes, that's what I said, I confirmed. Henry said he saw you with 3 big dogs, and I wonder if 3 dogs like that could live in a small house. Macy expressed her concern. Her fear of dogs struck me then. There are people all over the world who are terrified of dogs. One of them is Henry, I realized. Jane must have been with me when Henry saw her, but he must have been completely distracted by the dogs. I told you it's a small house. If you're worried, why don't you come back and take a look? I suggested. I will. I want to check the inside of the house. Macy's voice unraveled a little. Finally, Macy decided that there was no dog in the house. Anyway, I'll be there this Sunday at 10 a.m., she said before hanging up. Unexpectedly, I realized I could take my revenge. On Sunday, Henry and Macy came to my house as planned. You really came? I asked, surprised. I said I would come. You know it's because you bought the house on a whim that we're in this messy situation, Macy remarked as they took off their shoes and entered the house. That's really true. You should have stayed quiet and continued to do the housework like before, I replied, feeling a sense of satisfaction. Okay, that's it, I said, opening the living room door, gloating in my mind. Whoa! Ah! My son and his wife screamed in unison the next moment. There were 2 Dobermans, Moon and Sky, sitting there. What are you kidding me, Mother? This dog, Henry began. These are my dogs. Aren't they cute? Jane the dog trainer interrupted, standing up from the sofa and smiling at me. Jane found them for me. They are so cute because they are well trained. Moon, Sky, how do you say hello to our guests? The dogs barked at the same time. Macy said, oh no, and sat down with her head in her hands. Is she that bad with dogs? I wondered. Oh, they are so cute, Henry exclaimed. Don't worry, Moon, Sky, play with them, Jane encouraged. At the sound of her voice, the 2 dogs ran over to Henry and Macy respectively. They raised their paws, wagging their tails as if to say, let's play. Stop. Oh no, I'm scared, Macy exclaimed, shaking her head and beginning to wriggle as Moon invited her to play. But Macy didn't understand. I'm scared of dogs, Macy exclaimed, her fear evident as she burst into tears, snot running out of her nose. Oh dear, if you're going to live in my house, you'll have to get along with these kids too. Make them stop, I insisted. Macy's breakdown ruined the makeup she had studied on YouTube and was so proud of. Her mascara was running, and the smudged eyeshadow spread to her cheeks. With this tear-streaked face, she looked like she was about to take the train home. Hey Mom, do something about it, Henry pleaded. Meanwhile, Henry, who had been jostled by the much larger Sky, fell on his backside and began to scoot away. Sky, thinking he was playing, happily jumped on Henry. No, stop it. The dog is too big and scary, Henry cried out. I suddenly looked at Henry's jeans and saw that the color of his crotch had darkened a bit. He was so afraid of the dog that he had peed himself. How pathetic. Moon, Sky, come here. Jane decided it was time to stop and called the dogs. Immediately, the 2 dogs left Henry and Macy and returned to her. Moon, Sky, down, Jane commanded, and with that one word, the dogs lay down at her feet. They really are smart kids, I remarked, feeling proud of my dog's obedience. Until now, even though I've been slaving away at my part-time job and housework, you've never helped me. Besides, when I said I was going to leave, you decided to live on your own. Do you think your mother is stupid? I finally spat out the words I had been holding back as my son and his wife stood up, crying. I left home because I was fed up with you. I am not your housekeeper, I declared firmly. But doesn't that mean you have to? Henry began before I interrupted him. He's a well-trained and smart dog and much gentler than you, I retorted, gesturing towards Moon and Sky, who were calmly lying down. Henry and Macy lacked their usual air of bravado, a husband with a wet crotch and a wife whose makeup was a mess. They made the perfect couple. You also sold off my precious things without my permission. I will never forgive you for selling my mother's painting, I added, looking at Moon and Sky before turning my gaze back to my son and his wife. A house with 2 dogs this big is something we don't want. Henry agreed. That's right, we'll give up moving. So give me back the stuff we left behind the other day, then we'll go home, Macy demanded. They're still in the boxes in the next room. Take it and get out of here, I replied, pointing to the next room. Henry and Macy took a wide turn to avoid the dogs before opening the door. Whoa! They both screamed again and fell on their butts as they saw another Doberman, Hannah, sitting right next to the boxes in the room. Mom, the boxes, please get them, Macy pleaded. I don't want to. You brought them yourself, so take them yourself, I insisted. Peeking into the room, I saw Hannah just sitting there with a calm expression on her face. I can't go near a dog like that, Macy protested. Then give up your stuff, I replied firmly. You mean I should leave it? My bags and Henry's watches are in that box, Macy argued. You also got rid of my precious things without my permission, didn't you? I reminded her. I didn't ask you to leave them behind. I'm telling you, take it with you, I insisted firmly, glaring at Macy. She paused for a moment, perhaps remembering the presence of the dogs, and then lowered her eyes with a sigh. Please, Mother, bring us the boxes, Macy finally relented, her tone softer. You knew how important that painting that she sold off was to me, but you didn't stop her, I reminded her. Well, I'm sorry about that, but, Macy began, but she was interrupted by Jane's arrival. Hannah, how do we greet our guests? Jane asked calmly. Immediately, Hannah sat down and barked loudly. No, stop it, Macy cried out. Hearing Hannah's voice, my son and his wife reached their limit. With his wet jeans and her face covered in smudged makeup, they ran to the front door and got out of the house. After that, I sold all the personal belongings Henry and Macy had left behind to a pawn shop. I discovered that their belongings were of considerable luxury, with Henry's watch having a surprisingly high value and Macy's bag being of a particularly high class. The extravagance of these items left me in a state of dismay. Back at her house, Macy ended up being responsible for all the household chores. My former husband did not like Macy's housework. He constantly complained that the food was bad, the house was dirty, and the laundry was piled up. Macy could no longer go to her lessons because of her housework, and she gained 10 kilograms due to the stress. All of her frustration seemed to be directed at Henry. Mom, I'm at my limit, Macy finally admitted, starting to hit me. She's been fighting with Dad all the time. I want a divorce. One day, Henry called me, his voice exhausted. You chose your own wife, didn't you? You can take care of yourself. Of course, I would not give advice to Henry. I was sick and tired of being involved with that couple. Meanwhile, I bought a female Shiba Inu and asked Jane to train her. She's going to be a great dog. Jane smiled as she patted the head of the puppy I named Rio. Really, it's all thanks to you. I'm sorry for making the dogs play such an unpleasant role. Okay, I replied. When I heard what you said, I was more upset than you were. But from now on, you and Rio can live together peacefully. Yes, from now on, I will enjoy my life and my time, I affirmed, feeling determined as I gently picked up the puppy.